Was a grad student who just finished up. And Carl Tonsmeyer is also another faculty member in my department. It seems to have a lot of students out here at the produce show on the floor, by the way. Okay, so my first thing about getting started on this was the question, do we really need more research on organic food? Because I'm sure if any of you have looked into the organic food literature, there's quite a lot out there already, right? There's a lot of people willing to pay for organic. What do they know about organic? How do they feel about organic? So that was kind of our first question. Is there room for more research? And obviously people are interested in organic because of the big trends and growth we've seen. I've got the graph there going back to 2005 as far as sales. I think if you go back to like 1999, sales were only like $5 billion back then. So there's obviously been a dramatic increase in the last couple of decades, certainly in organic food. So that's one reason, but does it reach a time where we maybe have enough that we've looked at for organic foods? But what we started thinking about is, are people spending too much time just kind of thinking of organic as like a generic term, right? It's organic, what's the willing to pay for organic? But maybe we need to ask more questions besides just is organic, but does it matter to you where you buy organic food? Do you have different perceptions or different ideas of willingness to pay depending on where that organic comes from? Okay. So initially we started thinking, places you can find organic foods, and certainly for a long time they've been in farmers markets, or they've been other places like traditional natural food stores, things like that. And then we've had other change, such as Whole Foods comes along and they have organic selection as well, so those are places to buy them. And might viewed maybe by consumers as kind of the typical, traditional places to be buying organic produce and other foods. Okay. But, that's not the only places. Certainly we can get to a point where maybe organic foods are almost everywhere, right? You can find them all kinds of places. So some other places find organic foods, right? Local supermarket has them, and then, places like Walmart or Target or other super centers also now sell organic foods and have organic food lines. And I guess even Aldi, some chain that maybe not be associated with that so much, has a line of organic foods as well. But the question we want to ask then is, do consumers view all these things the same? Is an organic food that you purchase at a supercenter viewed by consumers any differently than when you buy at a farmer's market? Okay, and so we're going to be heading into the world of perceptions again, right? Ben, a few minutes ago, mentioned perceptions, and certainly the panel this morning upstairs, we had that discussion as well. How do you feel about things from farmer's market versus other outlets, and what kind of consumer perceptions are there, and what kind of difference do those make for how organic foods are viewed? So I want to think about a little bit, what's the influence of having these other outlets for organic food, and what does it mean for organic food demand? So certainly one of the differences, some of our newer outlets for organic, such as supercenters, are going to be charging lower prices, right? You have the ad there from Walmart certainly saying affordable. That's a key part of what they want you to see, is that you can buy organic foods at an affordable price. But is that a good approach, and how does that affect the system overall? Is it a good way to increase consumer demand for organic by having them cheaper? Is that going to spur demand? Or is there a possibility, maybe an opposite effect? Maybe organic food has a quality signal to it. Maybe people say high prices is going to mean higher quality, and if we offer them at a lower price, like places like supercenters do, then maybe they lose some of that quality signal. Maybe think, well, these aren't going to be as good a quality because they're not asking as much money for them anymore. And so does it shape then consumers' trust and perceptions of organic from these different outlets? How are they going to view things based on, the prices they see and the type of outlets and the reputation these different types of outlets have? And if they do, the final concern would be, would there be a spillover? Well, if organic is so mainstream you can get them at Walmart or Target, is it not so special then to get them at the farmer's market anymore, right? And would there be like a reverse thing back that think the other outlets should be charging lower prices as well? So our questions to examine then in this regard is, I want to consider the possible differences across 4 types of retail outlets. I know we have, there are other retail places we can buy organic foods as well, but I want to focus on these 4 for our research, and that's a farmer's market, our fresh format stores, which include places like Whole Foods and Fresh Mart, and supermarkets and super centers. And I want to do that for organic foods, and one of the things I want to look at for them are people's willingness to pay. Do they have different willingness to pay based on the outlet you're purchasing it at? And different perceptions. Do they perceive the quality of taste from organic foods from these different outlets to be different? Confidence, and what I mean by that is, how confident are they that when they see that USDA organic label on a product at a super center as opposed to like a supermarket, do they believe that that thing is really organic? And I think when we listened to a couple of videos this morning with the consumers that they talked to the farmers market, I think at least one person did say, do they trust what that label says when they're going to one of these places compared to how they trust things at a supermarket. So, my initial impression looking at this, I know I wanted to ask these questions, but I thought, well, if you see a USDA seal, shouldn't that mean the same for you everywhere? Should you really have less confidence just because it's being bought at a different place? So we want to look at that. And then the last issue on here, and again, I think this mentioned to the panel as well, the safety issue. Do you view organics as being safer compared to what outlets you buy them at as well? And safety actually leads into our second half of the research we have going, and that's to look at the influence of FSMA possibly on how people's perceptions are shaped and what they think of things. So for our new food safety rules, we have FSMA passed in 2011, first major food safety reform in over 70 years. And the big thing here is the shifting on the focus, right? The idea in the past was kind of contamination occurs, we have to respond to it. And now our real goal is to try and prevent contamination from happening in the first place, right? Kind of reshaping the way we look at food safety issues and how we address to them. Okay. Of course, with a lot of regulations, there's going to be exemptions to these things, and I want to figure how these play into things. First of all, obviously, regulations come across, it tends to be the small and medium-sized operations that have some concerns over what it's going to cost to implement these new regulations. And in fact, the FSMA does take that into account, and there are several exemptions to the full requirements of the law. And I want to focus on just a couple here for our study today, and that's based mostly on size or who you're selling to. And the first one is farms with an average annual value of produce sold across a 3-year period of less than $25,000. So we're talking about a pretty small set of operations here, but there might be some operations that would be possible to be buying from at a farmer's market, for example, right? Some of these smaller scale operations. Or slightly larger ones that have sales up to $500,000, but where they sell them has some qualities to it, right? So with a qualified end users, such as they're selling directly to final consumers or to a restaurant or retail food establishment, and no sales must exceed sales to elsewhere. So that allows them to meet up with this exemption idea. So we want to take this idea and look at this in terms of follow-up questions then. So our follow-up is, if we give people information on the proposed regulations, does that change people's safety perceptions and willingness to pay for organic foods within a retail outlet or across retail outlets? So for example, if they weren't too sure about safety about something bought at a super center, maybe if you tell them about these regulations, how things are going to change, maybe that's going to help them feel better about that, right? And maybe if it turns out at start that farmers market had a much better reputation, maybe those things will kind of come together. Maybe the safety differences won't be as large as you initially see. Okay. And of course, part of that is going to be what kind of assumptions consumers make about these regulations. Are they going to think that farmers market, when they're they're not going to get the full effect of the FSMA because maybe those producers are going to be exempt? Or are they going to wonder and maybe think, maybe I don't view this as safe anymore, or maybe it changes our perceptions a little bit, right? Again, it's all about perceptions here today. Okay. Since we're going to do this live in the field, we're going to do a live field experiment. We need to pick a specific commodity for us to deal with. And as you saw from the first slide, we decided to focus on organic grape tomatoes. And usually when we do one of these field studies, we have to decide what product we want to use. And we went with organic grape tomatoes this time because here's kind of our reasoning. We sat down and think of what kind of thing could we use. We figured they're popular, they're easy to eat. Importantly for us, because we're going to have an information treatment I'll discuss in a little while, they have had some food safety issues, so they're not a perfect thing. There hasn't been anything wrong that people might be concerned about. Inexpensive, since we're going to be auctioning them off. We don't have to deal with high prices or a lot of money to buy these. And of course, it's all important availability issue, because we have to have these out in the field for running them. Okay. So the way we did this was with a series of field experiments, auction experiments specifically. Since Brent is in Illinois, we decided one benefit would be to have our experiments done in 2 different states. So we had sessions conducted in both Delaware and Illinois. We tried to get out in the field and meet as many different kinds of people as we could. So we would set up in the local parks. We set up in some supermarkets when they allowed us to have permission, which is always kind of difficult to get, but some will let us do that. We did set up a farmer's market, although we didn't want to have too many people there. Obviously, they might be a little bit biased in terms of what kind of a response they have. And college campuses as well. Again, we tried to limit the student population, but we did have some of those, and that helped with like pilot sessions and things like that. And we want to make sure that we don't take too much time of people, right? So we required about 10 minutes per participant, so we're not asking a lot. Everybody's run one at a time, which might confuse people at first, so we're doing an auction with one person, but I'll make sure the details are explained to that in a few minutes. And I used to do a lot of lab experiments. I've kind of left the lab, and I kind of think this this field experiments is kind of a better thing. We've got a think system now. We do things quicker. We get a more diverse sample. I see people in the field experiments that I never can get to come to the lab, right? And they take part in these, and it's basically been less expensive for us. Okay. So how does the session actually work? Well, people are all set up. We've got a tent, we've got a table, we've got chairs, we got our survey instruments and things like that. And as people walk by, we ask them if they want to participate. We still have to use the human subjects informed consent stuff, right? We tell them it's all anonymous, they're going to get paid. We don't use any deception. That'll be important as well as part of what we do. And then we hit them right away with collecting bids for tomatoes from each of our 4 types of retail outlets. They put bids in. Actually, I should say before that, we actually explain the auction mechanism so they know exactly what they're doing, but I'll explain that in the slides in a few minutes. After they put their bids in, that's when we hit them with our survey about perceptions, right? We don't want to give them the survey first about perceptions, have them think about perceptions. We want to get bids first and then ask them what they were thinking about. Then we give them some FSA-MA information, and we've got 2 treatments. One has, besides that information, has a quote from the FDA about tomato safety information in the past. And then we collect our new set of bids, so we ask them they're willing to pay for the 4 grape tomatoes over again. And then we survey perceptions one more time, right? See if you guys have like a lot of before and after comparisons things here to look at. Plus we get our demographics for our usual modeling efforts. Okay, and then we determine our auction results and pay people. Right? And just to give you an idea of what it looked like on the survey, right? Just when we phrase it, what is your maximum price you'd be willing to pay for a pint of organic grape tomatoes from each of the following retail outlets? And we had those 4 listed. And of course, I'm not sure how many of these terms meant much to consumers. So in the actual survey itself, after each one of there to be like 2 examples in parentheses that were from local things, right? So supermarkets, like in this area, we would like Acme and ShopRite, something like that we had for examples. And certainly for the other ones, farmers market we didn't have an example for, but the other ones we had examples for consumers to see. And they depended by state too, they were a little bit different. Okay. And then participants were asked to rate the following attributes for organic grape tomatoes sold at each of the outlets. And these were on 7-point scales, so we asked them for their perceived taste, safety, and their confidence that tomatoes were truly organic, right? So we're collecting that information. Okay. Then in terms of our information treatment, participants were randomly assigned to one of 2 information treatment groups. Both received some basic facts about the FSMA regulations and exemptions, and I'll have those in a couple slides so you can kind of see what we showed everybody. One treatment, though, then added a quote about tomato safety from the FDA, including a number of outbreaks and some illnesses from a time period, I think, about a 20-year time period or so, to see if that had some influence on how people perceive things as well. Okay. And after that, after we had people read that over, they were provided that second round of bidding, right? Asked them once more time, what's your willingness to pay for these organic grape tomatoes from these 4 outlets? And they're given a second survey with their perceived ratings. And like I said, it had the demographic questions on there as well. Right. Okay. We went through a lot of iterations as far as what information to give people on FSMA. This was kind of Michelle, the undergrad. She was the main one who said, we really have to do something with FSMA because it's new and we got to see what people think of it. And she came to me with like a 1.5 pages of write-up about FSMA. And I said, we're trying to do this in 10 minutes on people in the park. If they're going to claim they have read this, I'm not going to believe they have read it carefully. We've got to have something nice and short and quick that kind of gets the key points across. So our key points was this idea of moving from, preventing rather than responding. That we thought was a key point. And then just quickly some of the things that they said, like evaluate hazards, identify places where there could be problems. And then, of course, we had our 2 exemptions that I mentioned earlier up here as well. Importantly, we try not to be suggestive of for any of the retail outlets, these people are going to be exempt or not exempt. In fact, we're going to ask them later what their likelihood they thought that people selling from those outlets would be exempt from the regulations. Okay. And for the half the people who were in treatment 2, we had this extra tomato safety quote, and basically it talks about, from 73 to 2011, there being 15 outbreaks. Interesting, 12 of those just since 2000, so it suggested maybe a lot of the outbreaks are more recent in history. And the other thing, it's got the illnesses and the deaths here. And the thing that I thought was maybe going to be interesting was that it notes that states in the eastern U.S. were more harder hit. So that might make an interesting comparison between how people in Illinois view this information compared to people in Delaware. Okay. Okay. How does the auctions themselves work? Well, we collected 8 bids, as you know, for retail outlets 2 times. Everyone was told in advance that only one auction was going to count, right? So they wouldn't have to worry about buying 8 pints of organic grape tomatoes while they're walking through the park, right? That's not be the best goal. And the way we do this is, since it's a one-person auction, when they're done, and we give them an envelope and say, open the envelope, and inside there'll be there's a bunch of random envelopes. They get to pick whichever one they want, and they pick one, and inside there it says which auction was real and what the price in that auction is. So, for example, it might say, farmer's market, organic grape tomatoes before information, and then there'd be like $1 or something on there. And we take that price on there and we compare what they bid with in that auction with the price on the piece of paper. If they were bid more than the price, then the person's going to buy the item not at the price they bid, but at the price on that piece of paper, right? That's what gives us our incentive compatibility, right? To make sure they put in a price equal to their true value. Or if the person's bid is less than or equal to their price, the person doesn't buy anything. Everybody gets paid participating no matter what, so everybody walks away with a little money. Some people walk away with some organic grape tomatoes as well. Okay. As far as our sample, like I said, we have the 2 states. We have 219 people across the 2 states. It's pretty evenly divided between the 2. We had a pretty good split there. Average age, a little under 40. We have you can see overrepresented in females at nearly 70%. As far as racial identity, 70%. I feel pretty good with that as far as being pretty representative of the areas we're in. Average annual income, $72,000. I didn't do the slide with comparing Delaware to Illinois. Delaware was a higher income group than the Illinois group was. And of course, we might be represented in higher education as well, right? Since we're doing these in and around college towns in a couple states. So we've got very high education. Okay. So shopping frequency for fresh produce by outlet, I thought that might be interesting to look at as a first thing before we get more into our results. You can see here, as far as never, we have quite a few people who are never buying fresh produce at super centers, which might not be a big surprise. We also have a large group of people saying never that they buy them from fresh format. I think part of the reason for that is actually in these 2 areas there's not a lot of convenient fresh format food stores. We had to drive a pretty good distance, both our groups, to get to a Whole Foods where we could buy some of these organic grape tomatoes to show. So I think that might just be partially an availability issue. As far as always, right, we've got a large group that buy them from the supermarket, which you might expect, right? Still the most popular place to be buying your fresh produce. We've got a pretty good selection for farmers market there as well. And certainly, often sometimes we see a good amount of people hitting the farmers markets as well. Okay. So if we're going to move on to our real results now, what do you think we're going to find for our safety perceptions? Okay. So there's some perceptions. Hopefully they show up pretty well for everybody. I tried to work well to make them big enough and colorful enough to stand out for the audience. Right, so we have our scale 1 to 7, from very safe all the way down to very unsafe. And if you look at our 2 major bars up in the safety column, they represent our fresh format stores and our farmers markets, right? So we've got lots of people, certainly the vast majority of people rate farmers markets and fresh format stores as being at least moderately safe or very safe, right? They think that's a good place to get things. You've got supermarkets a little bit less than that, and you've certainly got the super centers down near the bottom, right? We start moving down the categories a little bit we get towards the unsafe section. And as far as slightly unsafe, you see a nice bar there, 17% for super center. So right away we're seeing some different differences here, right? Their perception of an organic food from organic grape tomatoes from our super center there are safety concerns already. I'm not sure exactly where this is coming from. I might need more research to kind of delve into some of these a little bit more, but we're seeing some definite problems already, moderately unsafe, and then even in our very unsafe category, by the time we get down there, we don't have anybody from farmers market or fresh format, but we still have some individuals saying they think that stuff from super centers is very unsafe or even moderately unsafe, right? And that should be concerning for people selling organic produce in those types of outlets. Okay. So our next one is taste. I'll show all three of these, of course, even though they're not going to be a lot different as far as things go. Although the taste perception does have a little bit of a difference to it in that farmer's market is like a clear winner here. There's really this perception that if I'm going to buy stuff at a farmer's market, I'm going to have a big taste benefit, right? So we've got nearly 60% say farmer's market outlet, that's going to be taste very good, right? As far as supermarkets and super centers, don't have too many people saying those ones are going to taste very good, right? Those are pretty low numbers we have here. Fresh format still does pretty good, but it really takes over that taste is really the big place that farmers markets are winning in this effort here. Supermarkets are kind of just a good general thing, right? I mean, they do slightly good to neutral. That's kind of where our supermarkets hang out. And then you get down into the bad tasting section, and that's where you see the bars for the super center, right? They're not expecting that to taste nearly as good as from the other outlets. Okay. Confidence in our organic label by outlet. Again, this is maybe more like the first safety one, that we really have basically ties between our fresh format stores and our farmers markets. And again, not complete confidence in the supermarkets or in the super centers to be providing stuff that really is organic, despite having the seal on there. I think that's kind of a little bit concerning. I kind of thought there might be a difference. I've been worried for a while about maybe consumers not entirely trusting organic labels and things like that. And that's part of the reasons I wanted to do this and look at it from different avenues. I think I'm going to say I'm a bit surprised by how low the confidence maybe is in some of these other areas, like in the super centers. I mean, we showed them certified organic, and they're still doubting it, right? We have no confidence. What's that? Like 8% from the super centers have no confidence that it really is an organic product they're consuming. Okay. I just added a slide since those were all just graphs. I thought I'd kind of summarize quickly the ones we just looked at. And these are grouped by significant difference, right? So we're saying here that in terms of taste, we have a clear 1, 2, 3, 4 ranking each one of these significantly different. It tastes best at farmers market, second at fresh format, third at supermarket, and fourth down at the bottom for super center, right? There's a clear ranking. For other two, safety and confidence, we still have a fairly clear ranking, but there's no real difference between farmers markets and fresh format. Those are both viewed as equally likely to be safe and confident in what they're saying. Supermarkets, significantly less than that, and then super center even more significantly less, again, reduced from that. Okay, so as far as willingness to pay numbers, I'm going to put those, rather than do the graphs like I've just been doing, I want to combine those and look at the before and after we give out information. So I'm going to do that a little bit differently. First, before we do that, I think I should probably introduce the answer to the question, the likelihood people think that the products from those 4 outlets would actually be exempt from FSMA, right? So we've got a 7-point scale here where 7 meant very likely exempt, and I've got this group again by significance, right? So people thought it was most likely, if any of these were going to be exempt, it was going to be the farmer's market, right? We've got a pretty high 5.2 on our 7-point scale that they're thinking they're going to be buying something that's going to be exempt from these requirements. Fresh format, we're still on the top part of our scale here, where there's some concern about it being exempt. And then supermarket and super center, there's no real difference between those two. So this is the one positive, I guess, for super centers certainly, and for supermarkets as well, is that people think that, if I'm going to be buying something there, it's not going to be exempt. Those outlets are going to be selling us stuff that's going to meet the FSMA requirements. Okay, so the question now is, if super centers have a little bit of benefit here, maybe farmers markets a little bit of a non-benefit, is that going to affect willingness to pay, right? And we'll look at that first, before and after our information. And this is, so there's 2 information treatments. This is the one that compares just the FSMA information, nothing about the tomato food safety quote in there. And I divided up between states. And you can probably see I've used red highlighting for ones that significantly decreased after the information. And we have 1. We have for Illinois, the farmer's market willingness to pay for organic grape tomatoes significantly declined from 303 to 276. Beyond that, we have no significant differences. Actually, it's a nice test for our auctions, right, to make sure that people don't bid too differently if they didn't really think that mattered to them too much. So in Delaware, we have no significant differences, and in Illinois, we have this one significant difference here. Okay. Now, if we look at our other willingness to pay set of numbers, that would be for the FSMA and the tomato safety information. Again, we have one changing. Delaware, again, is not affected at all. None of the willingness to pay numbers for organic grape tomatoes from any of the Delaware outlets switched at all. Illinois, on the last slide, it was farmers market that switched. In this one, we have fresh format being significantly less. So not a very large difference here. Again, it seems like willingness to pay is not overly influenced by this safety information itself. But that leaves us with one other question we want to look at here, and that is not how does willingness to pay change, but how about those safety perceptions we asked them? Is the safety perceptions going to be different now that we've given them this kind of safety FSMA information? Okay. And here we have, again, we have two slides. So this is the one with the FSMA information only slide again, in our Delaware and Illinois breakdown before and after in their ratings. And what do we see here? Well, this time in green, for having a significant increase, we see supercenters in both states benefiting. They have a higher rating in terms of safety from those outlets now that they've seen the FSMA information and have a better idea of maybe what kind of food safety measures are in place, right? And in Illinois, not in Delaware, we see both fresh formats and farmers market formats seeing significantly lower safety ratings than we had before we gave them that information. So I could say maybe this is good or bad, right? Fresh format and farmers market getting knocked down in one state. They're still, where are they? They're still at the top, right? There's the gap between farmers market and supermarket disappeared in terms of after the information. But despite super centers having a benefit here in terms of getting a bump up, they're still down on the bottom of the list, right? It's not like they've come up all that much, relatively speaking. And then if you take this and add in our food safety information again with our tomato safety information, what do we see here? Well, a couple things stand out. Once we put in the tomato safety information as well, we finally have a change in Delaware, right? Delaware's been reluctant to change anything so far, except for the supercenter in the last slide. Now we see both fresh format and farmers market in both the states getting hit with a reduced safety rating, right? So people think that those farmers markets and fresh farmer stores, there's some likelihood they're going to be exempt, and they appear to not like that idea so much, right? They think that these maybe should not be exempt, and they're going to knock them down a little bit for that. Again, they're not getting down so much that they're not still top of the list. The other interesting thing happening here, of course, is the supermarkets, the supercenters had a benefit on the last slide, but now that we've added in talking about possible foodborne illnesses and things like that from organic grape tomatoes, that's gone, right? So we've given them like some positive information, some negative information, right? The positive being, here's some good things about food safety, how that's changing. And we couple that, though, with some negative now, right? Where here's foodborne illnesses that were related to tomatoes. There's been problems in the past. And a lot of times we give people some negative information that can kind of override some of the positive. And I think we're seeing some of that here where that benefit supercenters enjoyed in the first treatment have now vanished. So all we're getting is a little bit of a ding on fresh format and farmers markets for possibly being perceived as maybe not having to live up to the FSMA requirements. Okay, so that was the main things. I just want to go over a couple of other interesting things that we might have seen here. We had some post-survey opinions. I wanted to kind of introduce those and kind of back up some of the things we saw maybe in the earlier slides. Kind of the earlier interesting ones, right? We've got a 5-point scale here with 5 being strongly agree. The second one we have here is all farms should comply with FSMA regulations. So, right, people think if these are food safety issues that need to be addressed and they're important, why shouldn't everybody do them? Right? And I also wanted to ask, even though this isn't anything I even thought was being considered, but I thought, well, maybe they feel differently about food safety for organics. So I asked them, organic farms, should they be exempt from FSMA? And definitely we have a strongly disagree there, right? So the idea is, if there's FSMA regulations out there, people would like to see them for everybody. Okay. Right, Ben just told me that I had to have a slide that had all the complicated numbers. I decided not to show the complicated numbers. This is a little quick summary on my modeling at the end here. So willingness to pay modeling results, a few things kind of stood out. higher willingness to pay was for our Delaware consumers, higher income like you'd expect to have overall higher willingness to pay. Females, people with children in the household, some of the common things we've seen maybe in some of the organic literature in the past, right? More tendency to be willing to pay more and enjoy organic foods. Higher taste and confidence ratings obviously help, right? If you're not confident something's organic, you're probably not going to want to pay more for it, right? So that's something clear. And knowledge of organic fits in there as well. Okay. So I'll move on to kind of conclusion on some of these things, kind of summarize what I've talked about so far. Organic foods and farmers markets have a high willingness to pay and higher safety, taste, and confidence ratings over the other retail outlets. Fresh format is similar to them except for taste, right? Farmers markets are a clear winner in terms of taste all by itself. Supercenters have poor ratings and low willingness to pay for organic foods. I guess you could argue the willingness to pay, well, maybe people are used to paying lower prices there, so they're not going to pay extra for organic foods there. Why is confidence so low on the certified organic product? I'm not sure I have an answer for that. That's something maybe to look at a little bit more. Where is that trust issue coming from that's that drastic and shows up like that? Okay. Physical information reduces safety perceptions for our farmers markets and to some extent for our fresh format ones as well. Helps them for supercenters unless we give them information on food safety outbreaks in the past, right? And farmers markets still significantly higher no matter what you do. Okay. Right, our additional safety information, right, so it'll made the supercenter benefit. And just last note, which wasn't even kind of the key thing here, but consumers do not want exemptions to FSMA. Okay? And it says conclusions, but I have one last slide that I want to share that's kind of the thing that cracked up the students doing this study. We had to drive around a lot to get products from all these different outlets, right, because we don't use any deception. We had to actually be from these different retail outlets. And we didn't have a Whole Foods close, so we had to take a couple of trips to get to Whole Foods. And what we found out though is fresh format ratings came out way ahead in terms of willingness to pay and perceptions compared to supercenters. But when we went to our fresh food store, maybe I shouldn't say which fresh food store it is, right? But when we went to our fresh food store and our supercenters and bought organic tomatoes and brought them back to look at them, we discovered that they were same packages, same brand, same everything. So consumers may be willing to pay a lot more for one compared to the other one, but they're buying the same thing as far as what's actually in the package and what brand name is on those packaging. So there we go. Okay, so thanks, and it changed my font, so it says questions in that font. Never seen that before, but there we go. That's all I have.
Thank you, Professor Bernard. Questions for the professor?
So I want to get your thoughts, and if I'm wrong, just tell me. It looked like that willingness to pay was unchanged between pre and post for fresh format and farmers market.
The willingness to pay ones?
But is that right? For the most part. Yeah, for the most part. But for the food safety, the ratings went down, right? They thought it was less safe.
Yes.
So they're not changing their willingness to pay, but they think it's less safe.
That's right.
Is there something going on there as far as I don't know. It seems like if you thought it was less safe, you'd pay less for it.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, and it's definitely something we want to delve a little bit more into. Like the trust issue is something I want to look at some more too, as far as what's happening there. But it's significantly lower, but it's still the highest, right? So there's some of that too, and there's some maybe people aren't directly connecting that their willingness to pay should exactly line up with how safe they perceive it to be. If it's a certain point where it's safe enough for them to have that willingness to pay, they might even think of the two things independently. I don't know. We did have them bid first before we asked them their safety again, so I don't know if they think about those two decisions separately and maybe didn't connect the two directly as they were working on it. But it's a good question as far as what's exactly going on in people thinking.
Other questions?
Probably said it, but what was the incentive you gave them? How much did you pay them?
$5. Each person got $5. I don't think I did say it, so thank you.
Was there anything in the study that just completely surprised you other than perhaps the last slide?
Yeah, I kind of had this feeling going into it that supercenters were different than farmers markets in terms of perceptions, but they really just were quite a bit more different than I expected them to be. So the gap was just kind of unusual to me, especially with something that says certified organic on it and coming out that different. I don't know why consumers view that quite that differently when there's a label on it like that.
Yeah, thank you, Bernard, for this. On that note, I mean, you have a very specific demographic, so it might be that they just don't like the sports centers, and there's also for reasons. I mean, it might be a status, might be all sorts of things that, and they are probably some of them will be interviewed on the farmers markets as well. So, to what extent can you consider that in your reflections?
Yeah, we try to have the bulk of the samples still comes from local parks where we think we've got a really good feel for the general population. We used them before, and they definitely are different than if I just go to like a farmer's market or just on campus. And yeah, we're finding this, definitely they're saying the same thing. So it's something to delve into a little bit more. I'm not really sure I have good answers for all that yet.
One more question? Anybody? Okay. Professor Bernard from the University of Delaware, thank you so much.